Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt Show, Rabbi Shaya Karlinsky from Jerusalem. He is the head of the David Chappell College of Jewish Studies and Midreshet Rachel College of Jewish Studies, where men and women study Jewish text, philosophy, and law. He's also known as an expert in business ethics. In fact, people come from around the world to Jerusalem to talk with Rabbi Karlinsky about issues in business and ethics. And in fact, the topic that I want to talk about today is a very, very hot topic in the news, which is about self-driving cars and in the ethical issues. But we're going to hold that off to the end because I want to invite the rabbi on and ask you, Rabbi, why is it that today, when people are so focused on socially responsible investing, why is it that they would actually be looking towards ancient texts to try and understand the technology today and make smart investment decisions?
When we talk about socially responsible investing, it becomes a very subjective thing. And without some objective standards, without some frames of reference that go beyond the feelings of a person, it's really hard to correctly make your decisions if socially responsible investing is a value. Judaism does believe that it is a value, but we need to define what are ethical goals and what do we consider moral as opposed to just legal.
Well, let me give you a little background of what I've seen. I've been working on Wall Street for about 25 years now, and socially responsible investing has become more and more, sometimes people call it impact investing, and they say you should do well by doing good. But the problem is there are a lot of confusing issues, like there's a major company called Monsanto, which made genetically modified seeds for agriculture. And some people say, well, that's great because it feeds more people. And some people say it's irresponsible. And then there are companies like Dow Chemical, which they are sometimes included in SRI portfolios because today they're real leaders in environmental issues. But in the past, they actually were responsible for the death of thousands of people because of pollution. You'd mentioned a moment ago that we need objective standards, but how can we actually define them? And really, why Jewish ethics in particular would be relevant to an investor, in America, let's say, who's looking at deciding where to invest?
Jewish ethics can provide a more objective framework for what is considered ethical and moral. You can't have an ethical or moral dilemma when you have a moral decision versus an immoral decision. Ethics and morality, when there's a conflict, requires two compelling ethical values that are in conflict. If somebody leaves a wallet on the desk and walks out, and I have to decide whether to keep the wallet or return it, there's no ethical moral dilemma there. There's a dilemma whether to be moral or to be immoral. So when we talk about, let's say, genetically modified food seeds, we are really here with two conflicts. On the one hand, many, many more people can be fed, and that's a compelling value. And then you have to make a very strong case that there's something destructive about those genetically modified seeds. And if it's true, then we have a conflict, and then we need to bring some kind of standards and some kind of weighing to the table and give the nod in one direction or another.
So what you're saying is this is more than just some marketer on Wall Street saying, well, we either support GMOs, genetically modified organisms, or we don't, and trying to pitch it to people. It's a much deeper question, but how do we get into that?
There's a lot of hype. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of marketing on all of these matters. And we need to, again, from a Jewish perspective, we need to examine our sources. We have Talmudic sources, which is really the corpus of Jewish law and Jewish ethics. And we spend time studying these to try to bring these values to the table and resolve these conflicts.
Are the values the same? I mean, the book that you're referring to, the Talmud, was literally written thousands of years ago. Does it really have anything to say about issues that today we're dealing with on Wall Street?
Yes, the answer is yes. I say that only through experience, having studied it with many businessmen. And we go to these sources, and over again, the businessmen are amazed at both the sophisticated understanding that the Talmud brings to business issues, as well as the moral sensitivity that when you hear it and you listen to it, it resonates.
We're speaking with Rabbi Shaya Karlinsky from Jerusalem. He's the head of the David Chappell College of Jewish Studies. He's an expert in business ethics, and I wanted to start the discussion today on the topic of socially responsible investing because listeners to this show really do care that the money that they're investing is going to something good on the one hand. On the other hand, they want to make sure they're going to make money. And I think a lot of people, and myself included, sometimes get a little bit cynical about this because in my day job, I work as a financial advisor and people come into my office and we develop investment portfolios. And a lot of times we'll talk about SRI, socially responsible investing. And then when they find out, well, there are some good funds and some bad funds, or maybe I'll buy this stock or I won't buy it. At the end of the day, they're looking to make more money. And therefore, as an advisor, I feel that a lot of people are cynical about this, but I don't blame them. I think it's because they're just getting the information in a way that's being served to them, like we said before, like advertising or marketing, as opposed to really thinking about an issue. So, Rabbi, let's dive into a specific issue which is hot today. And I want to see if what you said before is really true, that we can derive from ancient sources answers to modern day questions. So the question that people are talking about today is self-driving cars, and the Google car, the Tesla car are good examples. And the question with a car like this is, if it has to make a decision, let's say it's driving on a bridge and a little girl crosses the street, and either the car is going to decide to jump off the bridge and save the pedestrian, or and therefore kill the driver, or it's going to go straight and kill the little girl. Let's presume for our discussion, there is no other choice. It comes down to this. How can someone make an ethical decision about whether to buy such a car? And ultimately, we're going to back it up, whether you should invest in a company that is making such a decision.
You see, I think, which is very typical, is the wrong question is being asked much too far down the food chain. In other words, when we want to talk about what decision should be programmed for the car to make, we have to ask, what decision should a human driver make? And I think we have to work from there. Otherwise, you have no frame of reference. Otherwise, it becomes very arbitrary, very emotional. And so in that situation, Jewish law and ethics brings to the table a very fundamental principle, and that is that when a person's life is in danger and he must choose between saving his life or saving the life of another person, so the Jewish law is clear that one's own life takes precedence over another person's life. On the other hand, if one has to save one's life by committing murder, then that is a crime that one must forego one's life for. So there's a difference between committing murder, which is a sin, a capital crime, and you must give up your life rather than commit murder, as opposed to saying that if I have to choose between saving my life or saving somebody else's life, then of course I choose to save my life. So a driver who's confronted with that situation is allowed to make the decision to save their life at the expense of the pedestrian. That is exacerbated if the pedestrian is behaving illegally. So if we accept that as the frame of reference, now the car can be programmed, therefore, it is legitimate to program the car to save the driver's life. That is the basic approach. There is one mitigating factor, and that is that here, the driver is not the one saving his life at the expense of somebody else's life, but in fact, we have a programmer deciding whether the car should continue driving or veer off. And then we bring another Jewish principle to the table, and that is what we can call status quo or non-intervention. That when there's a situation that if I intervene, there's going to be one problem. And if I fail to intervene, status quo, an equally serious problem will be created. The nod is always given to non-intervention. So one could make the argument that if the car is driving in a certain path, and the only way I can save the driver is by veering, and by going straight, I will kill the driver, then I would continue straight rather than veering to kill the pedestrian. But on the other hand, if I kill the pedestrian by continuing to drive and I have to veer and that will kill the driver, it is legitimate to continue driving because that's called non-intervention. These are the two approaches that one would take when deciding how to program the car.
Well, it sounds like these are conflicting, right? One of them is the non-intervention, meaning if I don't do anything, in one case, Well, I guess in the case you're describing, the pedestrian would be killed either way if I continue going straight. And so you're saying the end result is the same, no matter which principle you use?
Well, it depends. In other words, one could give the nod to the driver and say, since just as if the driver would be driving the car, he would be allowed to do whatever is necessary to save his life, assuming, by the way, that the driver is not driving irresponsibly, then he would be allowed to do whatever is necessary to save his life at the expense of the pedestrian. One would be allowed to program the car in such a way. But the question is, one could argue that the proper way to program the car would be non-intervention, non-deviation from the planned route rather than deviation. But I would give the nod to doing it the way the driver would do it. The driver has the car, and he's the owner of the car, and he's driving the car. And therefore, it would be legitimate for the programmer to do whatever the driver would do if he was driving the car.
Maybe the difference you can help me to figure out is, one, it seems different when you're actually driving and you're in the situation and you make a split-second decision about whether to kill the little girl or to kill yourself as the driver, compared to, there's some committee sitting in Google and discussing this issue and bringing in socially responsible investment representatives. They have a chance to think about it. Is there any difference between pre-programming this decision and making it live?
Okay, so there's no question that in real time, the driver may not make the right decision because he's under pressure. But when we talk about values and morals, we're talking here about what the correct thing to do is when you are in complete control. And therefore, when the driver is able to make the rational and moral decision, that's the decision we should make when we're programming the car, sitting there under no pressure. Obviously, in real time, the driver may make a mistake, but we certainly don't want to program based on what a driver under emotional pressure might do. That's part of the advantage of having a computer controlling it, is that we can program the perfect, quote, morality, unquote.
Mm-hmm. So again, to stress it, it's not a computer deciding, it is the programmers who decided. You used an interesting term. You said in real time, the driver may make a wrong decision. So, okay, so we're not going to perhaps blame him to the level that we might, as opposed to a committee or a programmer deciding something. What if, as is a real possibility, what if the Google programmers decide, if the car detects there's a little girl and she's 10 years old, she has more life potential than the 50-year-old driver, therefore we're going to kill the driver. And that's the way that they make the decision. So let's bring it back to the question of investing. It sounds to me like you would define that as an immoral choice, because the moral choice, you said, is to actually protect the driver. Are we allowed to invest in a company that at the outset, with thought and deliberation, makes the choice that we would define as immoral?
When you say the word allowed, that is a legal statement. So there's the situation you described where I'm investing in a company that made that decision. I don't think that Judaism and Jewish law and ethics would prohibit you from investing in such a company. There are too many layers removed from your investment to the decision being made and the actuality, because a case could be made, even though Judaism would not have given the nod to the 10-year-old girl, unless it would have been a non-intervention decision. But in general, the fact that she's a 10-year-old girl versus a 50-year-old driver, that's an emotional decision. That's not a legal or ethical decision from a Jewish perspective. But the permission to invest in such a company where the activities of the company are certainly legitimate, there should be no barrier on a legal or moral level. A person may emotionally not want to invest in such a company. That's fine. But if you're turning to me to ask me whether there's a problem investing in a company that made that decision, I would not say that there's enough of a connection between your investment and any immoral or illegal behavior.
Okay, and I don't want to open up a can of worms, but it sounds to me like you're differentiating between, let's say, investing in Google that may make a decision to kill the driver, as opposed to, let's say, funding a tobacco company. Okay, so
there we get into the real issue of ethics, morals, and connection. In other words, what level of responsibility do I have for the results of the company? And we'll take an extreme. A tobacco company is pretty extreme, and yet one could say that, in theory, the tobacco company is manufacturing a product that, if it was used responsibly, a couple of cigarettes a day, it would not lead to the death and the horrendous health problems that regular smoking can lead to. I certainly would not want to invest in a tobacco company. I personally think that a store that sells cigarettes is not behaving at the highest moral standards. But I don't think we can say that there would be some legislative reason to avoid that. A person may not want to out of sensitivity. And here we get, when we talk about so many of these issues, the commandment that the Torah, that the Bible gives, is one that in fact creates a gray area. The commandment is one to be a person of holiness, of ethics, to do what is right, which goes beyond doing what is legal. So the Jewish law does give a lot of flexibility in these moral, ethical decisions, as opposed to providing a resource. In other words, for somebody to sell a gun to a terrorist, that's absolutely illegal in Judaism. But for somebody to run a gun store, selling guns that have legitimate uses, and somebody might take that gun and use it illegitimately, I don't think that Judaism would prohibit it, just like it would not prohibit a car dealer from selling a car, even though it's a very strong possibility that a driver could kill somebody with that car.
Mm-hmm. Rabbi, this has been fascinating. And I know it goes on and on as you're talking. Everything you're saying, it leads to another question. But unfortunately, we are just about out of time. But tell me, in the last few seconds, how can people follow you, follow your work, and maybe even have a chance to talk with you or to come to Jerusalem and learn more about business ethics?
The first place is to visit our website, www.darchenoam, DarcheNoam.org. And there's a range of programs, including an executive learning program, where if people are visiting Jerusalem, they can come and study with us topics of interest to them. And we look forward to welcoming inquiries.
Okay, we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show. Rabbi Shaya Karlinsky from Jerusalem, thanks so much for your time.
Good to talk to you.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.